Okay, so I'm just going to go through the whole entire lecture for anyone who misses class over the next couple days, and because on Monday the 15th when I'm gone, I don't know where each period is going to be. So if this is Monday the 15th and you are listening to this, go ahead and fast forward to whatever part you have yet to receive to make sure that you get it, the entire information. First, I'm just starting out with this screen here, just a reminder of what the essay organizer will look like for each of the paragraphs that you're writing. So we'll have an intro, which is just standard. Your thesis statement is a part of that, and then 2 body paragraphs. You're going to begin with a topic sentence relating it back to the thesis statement, so whatever part of the prompt that you're going to be answering in this paragraph. Introduction of proof, and actually I'm going to end up changing that to evidence. What sort of evidence are you going to be using for this justification? Make a little bit more sense once I start the lecture with the actual material. Then the evidence is go ahead and actually explain the evidence. Are you talking about world trade? And if so, what are those specifics? Anything that you can throw in there as specifics for that. And then analyzing it. You are then at this point explaining how this supports your topic sentence, pretty much your thesis statement. So like the first prompt is, why was the United States entry into World War I justified? At this point you would explain why, if your evidence is trade, this makes it justifiable for the United States to enter into World War I. I'll come back and revisit this periodically. But remember, you do not have to write on this, you just have to have it with you every day, and turning it in on the last day with your name on it. Not to be graded, just for having turned it in for the easiest 5 points of your life, hopefully. All right, so one of the 4 prompts that you are going to be given on the 19th is, why was the United States entry into World War I justified? So we're going to focus here on this mini part of the lecture on why the U.S. entered into World War I. In order to do that, we just need to talk about why the world itself was pulled into a world war. Why was this not an event that stayed between 2 very small nations who were fighting over, in the world terms, petty things, but of course to them it meant the world. Just as overall, the world was building up our military, and we just talked about that ourselves with the imperialism unit, that we needed to have the biggest, strongest navy in the world. Everyone was doing this at the same time. You saw European countries increase their military spending and size of their military, rather, by 300%. So everyone around the world is just pumping so much money, time, energy into military. I always use the poor example of kind of like steroids. Our countries were on steroids at this point, just kind of building up muscle, and you kind of are anxious to use it and show it off and let everyone know. I mean, we showed it off with the Great White Fleet. That was not an act of aggression, but definitely an act of intimidation. Everyone's just waiting for a reason to use it. And even if they aren't necessarily like, oh, I just can't wait to kill someone, essentially, they aren't afraid of getting into conflict because they know that they have this outstanding military behind them. And again, that could be relatable to someone on steroids as well, or just, really beefed up, big, just like a big, huge, really successful football team is just not afraid to enter into a difficult situation with, a very competitive, another difficult football team. So we have that going on. We at the same time have nationalism. We know what nationalism is, again, from our prior studies. But those under the rule of someone else wanted out. We still have a good number of countries who are colonized by other nations, and they don't want that anymore. We know what that's like as the United States because we ourselves fought to get out of colonial rule. In addition to that, we also see nations wanting to expand their nation, continue to grow an empire, very similar to what the United States did at the conclusion of the Spanish-American War. We took on more territories, more land that was under the control in some way of the United States, even if it wasn't complete military or economic or political control. We did have a strong influence, so we could kind of consider that a part of our empire. We have the alliance system too, which, you know, the United States has always kind of been like, you know, besides economic alliances, maybe military, political ones aren't the best idea because you feel tied to a country and you might need to support them in a matter that you don't really believe in. In fact, George Washington, our first president, spoke out very, very strongly against any other alliance besides economic reasons because you are going to be pulled into a conflict at some point, even if it's not for the best interest of the United States. And he was 100% right, because you see that happen here. An additional issue, which the alliance system is basically countries getting together and saying, hey, I got your back if you got my back. Which in a sense is kind of expanding your empire. When you're in an alliance with someone, you don't have any sort of control over them. You don't have economic, political, or military control. You just know that you got one another's back. What made this even more of an issue is that there were a lot of secret alliances. So you might align yourself with a country that you have no problem with. You know, they're very similar to you. Let's throw out, you know, Canada. That seems like a pretty safe alliance. They don't really get people in too much, you know, they don't upset people besides, you know, Canadian bacon. That upsets some people. But other than that, it's a pretty safe country to align ourselves with. But what if they have a secret alliance with Syria? You know, that's an area of conflict right now, which a lot of people have some strong opinions about. Syria is getting themselves, I mean, it's kind of died down a little bit, maybe a poor example, but they were getting themselves into some conflict. So Canada might have to step up and support Syria on one side of the token or the other. Now suddenly we're forced to, and we had no knowledge of that sort of alliance, but because we've aligned ourselves with Canada, we now have to support Syria, which is exactly what happened in this situation. I also, by the way, am going to attach an online lecture that I used to require students to listen to for World War I that gives much more detailed explanation of all this. You're welcome to listen to. I know you're all dying to listen to even more of me, but it's there for you, okay? So we have these three things going on all together. They're just brewing and growing and being, you know, what it is, and we're eventually going to see this become a larger issue. So when war did break out between the world, the United States kind of watched in anticipation and thought about, what do? We want to stay neutral. It's our ultimate goal. We're still going to abide by what the suggestions of George Washington were. We're to kind of stay neutral. And we didn't really have too many alliances with anyone besides economic alliances, so we were safe in that regard. So our government was very strong stance on staying neutral. And they thought the best way to stay neutral was just trade with everyone. Just to ignore what's going on, trade with everyone, and hope that nothing bad happens because of our decision that was the best way to stay neutral, so through our neutrality. Citizens, though, on the other hand, they had a little bit of difficult time with this because this was their old world. Most Americans can trace their heritage back to one of these European countries at war. Most of them, you know, on the Allied power side of it. So they felt some sympathy towards what's going on and questioned whether the United States could be getting involved, maybe not with the military, but taking a side even economically, like, hey, we should only trade with this side, or speak out against what, you know, so-and-so is doing, or yada, yada, yada. So it was difficult, but they did their best. We did have some big businesses and such try to get a profit from the situation and give loans or trading benefits to the Allied powers, which we'll see catch up on at us in quite some time here. So U.S. reaction to events of the war. This is kind of that background and proof. What I just presented to you is a little bit more of the intro paragraph info, and this would be something that you would select to write on because reasons we got involved in the war, a lot of it had to do with the stalemate, it had to do with trade, U-boat attacks, and Zimmerman telegraph. So you would select two of these to talk about and do a paragraph on one and then a paragraph on the other. So the stalemate and modern warfare that's going on. So this is our first modern war. Of course, nowhere compared to how modern our current war is, but modern for the time. We have better guns. We have experimenting with tanks, very weak, that a pebble could, jam them up. We're even using some aircraft, and that includes hot air balloons just to see troop movement and things like that. So to fight this, because, if someone comes at you shooting, hopefully that never happens. Maybe it's paintball though. Okay, you're paintballing. Someone's shooting at you, you're going to want to get down. Okay, so you're laying on the ground. That's going to provide you some sort of safety. But even more safety would come in the form of getting underground or below ground or in a ditch, so to speak. So we see the both sides build ditches all along the the battlegrounds, and they're hanging out in these trenches. So we call them. You get trench foot and all that kind of stuff. I don't suggest you Google image that, but you just hang out, and it's very, very dangerous to jump out of your trench and go into what they call dead man's land, because you will be a dead man. So the war is just dragging on, and it's going nowhere. No one's really on the offense. No one's really on the defense, and you're seeing a high number of casualties at the same time. We've got yellow journalism going on, and more people are starting to want to do something to support the Allied powers, and it plays at people's sympathy. We also have, as I mentioned, we have big businesses and banks who have provided loans to the Allied countries, just assuming they're going to win so quickly. I mean, you got Great Britain, France, Russia, and when it doesn't happen, they're fearful of losing their loans. So they're going to use these stories of stalemate and trench warfare and things to their advantage through yellow journalism to try to persuade Americans to want to enter the war efforts in some way. And if we want to, our president's going to need to, type of thing. So that's kind of a little bit of background proof, evidence rather, of. So I'm going to talk about trade and U-boats background first and then analyze. This is one of those that you're going to see. You kind of can't talk about one without the other, but there is some separation. So as we have already discussed, the United States claimed neutrality and said that the way we're going to approach neutrality is by trading with all countries. Well, pretty quickly after the war got started, Great Britain put a blockade on German shores and did not let anyone, including American merchants and otherwise, in to trade with Germany. Our response should have been some sort of punishment towards Great Britain, likely in the sense of, well, you don't let us trade with them, we're not trading with you. The United States did not take that route. We continued to trade unpunishment to Great Britain, which is a sign to Germany that we are not truly neutral. They probably sense that if that was the opposite, we would have stayed quiet about it. We would have taken some sort of action. And so that idea that the United States isn't truly neutral and that if we ever join the war efforts, it would probably be on the Allied side, plays a role likely in some decisions later on that pulled us into the war. And then U-boats. It was tough for Germany to compete with our Navy. Great Britain Navy. Well, ours as well, as they are the biggest, strongest navies. But they do have some advantage. They have what we call a U-boat, which is a submarine below ground, and we have really no radar at all. So you don't really know when one's coming until you can pretty much see it, and by then it's a little bit too late. We did not like the use of this U-boat, probably because it wasn't ours to begin with, since we didn't like it. But we have a strict belief of freedom of the seas, that you can't really own the seas or control it, and that if you are entering too close to like German waters per se, that you need to be given warning. And first off, one of the warnings can generally be you see the boat in front of you. It's above water, you see it, there's one warning, but then 3 warnings, like, if you proceed any further, you'll be shot. Yada, yada, yada. Well, they were not giving any warnings, and they were just shooting on sight, and they could see us, we couldn't see them, type of thing. So we felt that was a violation of the seas and a violation of our free trade as well. So here we are feeling like our neutrality is being violated by the Germans, but we never felt that way about the British side of things. And then something that happened is the sinking of the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a British passenger liner, like a cruise ship, that left the United States, and it had Americans on the ship. They entered into warring waters and were torpedoed by a U-boat, sunk, and everyone died on it, and that includes Americans. Our newspapers here, using yellow journalism, really for a flair of the dramatic, highlighted, the death of Americans. This British passenger liner, not a military boat, not a merchant boat, was sunk, and with no warning, no regard for human life, all that. What was left out of there, and maybe because they didn't know about it really at all, but there was war materials on that boat secretly, because they were having a tough time because the U-boats getting war materials into Great Britain. So they said, well, if we put on a passenger liner, they'll be able to get through the U-boats. And clearly that didn't happen. So depending on how much our knowledge is of that, the United States probably should have been upset, yes, with Germany for sinking it, because they probably had other alternatives, but also with Great Britain and businesses that put the war materials on there and still allowed American civilians onto the boat. So analysis of that, trading. Well, the trading, if the United States would have either played neutral or just not traded with either nations, we wouldn't have had American casualties. And these are American casualties, merchant boat-wise, military, as well as civilians. We wouldn't have been entangled in this mess if we didn't proceed in trade, but we had, and our free trade, freedom of the seas were violated, as well as American human life was lost because of this, and we feel it's justifiable to seek revenge for American lives, which kind of falls into the U-boat attack analysis as well, is revenge for civilians who had been killed, American civilians. Also because the U-boat attacks, unprovoked, which was a big thing, the unprovoked component of it, violated freedom of the seas and was just an unfair tactic used by the Germans. Really quick, just kind of going back with the U-boats, the Lusitania, Germany right away apologized for it and promised that they would not participate in any more unprovoked attacks, that they would give warnings before shooting. And they did for a while, but then when things became more and more dire with the war, they ended up foregoing that and going back to no warnings. But they did give a worldwide warning, like, hey, everyone, we're back to attacking without warning. So this is kind of your warning, don't enter British waters. And then we got the Zimmerman Telegraph, when it became very, very apparent that the United States was throwing more and more support behind Great Britain and the Allies. Germany was worried, like, what do we do? How, if they enter the war efforts completely, we are going to be slammed. We're going to be, we're going to completely lose this thing. Is there anyone out there that could possibly support our war efforts? And they looked and they're like, well, maybe Mexico. Mexico hates the United States. There's the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and then the recent interactions during the beginning of imperialism with Mexico. So a secret coded message, telegram, is sent to Mexico to try to broker a deal. It says, if the United States joins the war effort on the Allied side, we make you a deal. If you join on our side, then should we win the war, we will go to Mexico and help you reclaim the land lost in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Well, we were furious. And this, in our eyes, was a direct threat to the United States. That even if we said, okay, there's a threat, we know what's going to happen, so we will not for sure join the war efforts, because if so, this will happen. But long-term wise, this is almost like an alliance between a Western Hemisphere country, one that shares a border with the United States, and Germany. That is scary. This type of offer can continue to be made if we don't take Germany out, if we don't show them some sort of consequence to such a direct threat. So those are some of the justifications used to enter World War I. Remember that these justifications, you don't have to feel are justifications. You don't have to agree with. It's about what were the justifications of the time, and these were them. And once the United States decided to enter the war, enter World War I, what actions were taken to effectively prepare for war? When we entered the war on, April 2nd, 1917, we had 200,000 men in the military. Nowhere near enough. So we instantly initiated the draft. Probably should have done this before we declared war, but whatever. Instantly, 9 million men were registered, and instantly, as instantly can be at a time with, we're talking snail mail. Of the 9 million men that were registered, 3 million of them were enlisted through the registration, so activated. 5 million men volunteered. Boot camp and such was quick, was weak, but we sent our men over. Just some history of it, our men were coined doughboys, like the Pillsbury Doughboy, because they were fresh-faced, energetic, and just overall maybe kind of cute, I guess. They were ill-trained, ill-prepared, but they had exactly what the Allied powers needed, and that was rejuvenation, enthusiasm, and numbers. So that helped intimidate into surrendering of the war. Analysis of that was, you can imagine, you can't fight a war without military men. So what the war needed was enthusiasm, the numbers, and the tipping point. What was going to change this war? And because the war was continuing to be still the same thing over and over again for years, what was going to change it? And U.S. military was what was going to change it and what did change it. Another thing is industry. We have our industry right away, as we do during war times often, is we have to start thinking about production and how we use our resources. So one thing we did, you may have heard about it done during World War II. Actually, you may not have heard about it yet, but we did it much more during World War II than War I, but is rationing. We need metals and oils and food stuff for our military overseas and just the war effort, so all the Allied powers. So we start to encourage and also do some required rationing, kind of like what you're hearing a lot with the water, with the drought, if you've paid much attention to it, is, you can only water your lawn every or twice a week, and it can't be raining out when you're watering it, otherwise you'll be fined. So one thing they promoted was wheatless Wednesdays, meatless Mondays. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. I don't know. But it's that type of thing to encourage Americans, and like I said, also require that you only consume so much. We also took it as far as you would get a rationing book where you only got, depending on the size of your family, so much milk a month, so much, of all these different products. So when you went to the grocery store, you paid and you surrendered your coupons. They also increased agricultural production, like 10, 20-fold. They pumped the farming industry full of whatever it needed in order to produce as much as humanly possible, because we were feeding the world right now. And that was a big thing. It was needed, especially now that one thing, too, is when we enter the war, you clearly, it seems stupid, you're not going to trade with the enemy. Okay, you want to have full advantage, and so we actually didn't trade with the enemy, so I guess I was wrong saying fed the world, but most of it. So we increased agricultural goods. We changed industry over, so nylon industries were now creating things like, well, I guess it's more World War II, but parachutes. Poor example, we didn't use parachutes during World War I, but that type of idea. A lipstick company, the lipstick cases that lipstick comes in are perfect size of bullets, so you would transform that industry over. You wouldn't see as many cars made for, just regular citizens, and now they're military grade and such. We're transferring everything over, producing a lot, creating war contracts with businesses, saying, hey, we're going to pay you an outrageous amount of money for you to produce this, that, or the other. So this in analysis helping us prepare for wars. We were the most supplied side of the war, the Allies were. We had everything we needed. Now we just needed a victory. But they had all the food stuff, they had all the military stuff that was needed in order to be successful, and that's extremely valuable. You might have heard in this current war efforts, the war on terror, that things like body armor and things are needed. We're lacking it because they're trying to produce as much as possible, but you're also trying to keep a nation alive with the things that we need, and you have an increasing military and things. So that's a huge upper hand to have enough guns, enough clean, dry uniforms and socks and food and things like that. It helped us prepare for the war. And then morale among the military, but also among average citizens as well. We needed to be excited and excited's a poor word, but I guess enthusiastic about the war efforts and understand, or I think we understand what it's about. So they created the Committee of Public Information, the CPI, that just promoted things like, if you've seen in my classroom, the We Can Do It with the woman, flexing her muscles, that is getting, that's propaganda, and that's what the CPI creates. It's propaganda, things to get us to understand what we're fighting for and support it. Because if we support it, we're going to get behind rationing. Men are going to volunteer. People are going to get involved, help out, join the Red Cross, donate money, whatever it is, in order to make sure that we are successful. In an analysis, the morale and support of citizens in the United States is crucial. You'll notice that when we get to the studies of Vietnam War, that the government and military did not have the support of the American people, and that affected everything. Probably why we left Vietnam when we left, and why presidents left office and didn't come back, and all this stuff. It's crucial for us to support it. And when we don't, also, then you don't see a volunteer army. You see people drafting the draft instead of getting involved in it and things. It's very, very crucial. And you'd be fighting people who aren't willing to participate in the rationing that's taking place. Just some notes that you need. Negative effect of U.S. involvement is we created the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Acts of 1918, which, speaking out against government and war effort, were punishable by law. And also, and that plays into spies and things like that too. We also got a little bit stricter with our immigration. There was also a tax on anything German. They stopped teaching German in schools, stopped listening to Beethoven. Sauerkraut became Liberty cabbage. That's kind of entertaining, but you start to see some discrimination against Germans here in the United States. Just for your notes, the war ended on November 11th at 11 a.m. So 11/11 at 11 a.m. 1918. So why was the Treaty of Versailles a weak document? Well, we have first the goals of the treaty, and it was to make the world safe for democracy. It was the war to end all wars. And so there's two thoughts on how to do that. Okay, if you get in trouble, how are we going to make sure you don't do it again? Well, we could punish you, which is the Allied powers. If we punish them really bad, they won't do it again. President Wilson, though, said, no, we need to forgive and forget. We need to acknowledge the causes of it that we all participated in, militarism, alliance, all that kind of stuff. We need to try to prevent it and move on. We're all kind of to blame type of thing. Both could probably work, depends on the scenario, but the actual treaty that was created had very little of Wilson's suggestions. His suggestions came in the form of 14 points. His 14-point speech, like honor freedom of the seas. He said no reparations. All this stuff that would really lead to the forgive and forget and allow everyone to recover. That's not what happened. The treaty was mostly punished, one of the things, of Wilson's suggestion that was created was the League of Nations, a part of his 14 points. He's like, we need a worldwide kind of governing body to oversee world affairs, have representation from all, democratic countries, and try to kind of police the whole thing in a place where people can go to state their grievances, get them over with without going to war. So they created this League of Nations, but it was incredibly weak. So back to the question is, why was the Treaty of Versailles a weak document? Which one thing we'll also look at next semester is how the Treaty of Versailles actually created World War II, because it was that weak. We have 4 things. We have Germany takes blame for World War I. So out of everything that was involved, they were the ones who had to take all the blame. That's a big deal. The United States wouldn't want to do this. No country would want to do this. We're egotistic, all of us, in our own nature. And they knew that this was going to go down to the history books, that Germany says we are to blame for millions of people losing their lives, billions of dollars lost. It's going to be a big deal. And they're going to begin on a negative side, and they have to like build themselves back up and rebuild a positive name for themselves, and that could be dangerous, that rebuilding of a superior positive name, which plays a little bit into the analysis there. Their ego was hurt. There was a lot of resentment. They were really unable to move on from that, and it made it impossible to feel as if they were a team player in anything, the League of Nations and otherwise, because they were to blame. You kind of go in with your head hung low and everything. You're not willing to, and maybe not feel that you're able to be a team player to make sure that something like this doesn't happen. So you could sit at a table of negotiations or discussion later on, and you're like, I'm to blame. Like, you guys don't care or whatever. We're not going to work together. We're different. And there were so many other things to blame for World War I. The second one is reparations. They had to pay up to $3 billion of reparations to the countries at war. This is very important. The United States did not make Germany pay reparations. We did not. Make sure you make that clear when you write about it, talk about it. That's more important for the second semester essay, but here too is the Allied powers, with the exception of the United States, put together a bill. So this is how much it costs for us to fight that war. And since you're to blame, you've got to pay for it. And that bill was upwards of $300 billion. And it was also written in that additional fees might be applied later once they really feel the impact of the war. So you have now, playing into the analysis part, a struggling economy, which every country at war, with the exception of the United States, struggled immensely post-World War I. War was fought on their land. They lost millions of men. We only lost a couple 100,000. We had benefited from the trade, so we are actually experiencing the roaring 20s, excitement. Everyone has money, spending money. The rest of the world is in dire, dire need of repair, economically and everything. This includes Germany. So they are economically unstable, and now they have to pay reparations. So you're already trying to rebuild your country, and you owe all these other countries billions of dollars. And the consequences of not paying it back is they could send in military and take over your economy. So it makes for an unstable society that's nearly impossible to rebuild. So the people within the German country are in despair. They're upset. They're looking for change. They're looking for a way out, an answer. And we'll actually see that answer for them, they feel, is in Hitler. We'll look at it later. But it was a weak document because of this reparations. They're never going to be able to make the world safe for democracy, or this isn't going to be the war to end all wars, because you have someone who's still angry, bitter, resentful. It's not what you want to create. And then there's loss of territory. So Austria-Hungary divided up by 4 individual nations. Germany becomes there's a buffer between Germany and the Soviet Union between these nations, because Russia, now the Soviet Union, because they're having their own revolution type of thing, they've been attacked by Germany. They want to create this buffer. So now you have an area divided up, because that's what works best for everyone else. So you have people who are now a part of a country that they don't feel a part of, that they don't want to be a part of, and that's going to lead to some revolt later on. I mean, nationalism was one of the reasons that started World War I, and a part of that were people who were being colonized or forced into something that they didn't want to be a part of, and they revolted. you're kind of creating that by dividing up these nations without ever consenting the people of these nations. So some people are German, they don't want to be. Some was German area, they felt they were German. It was chaotic and silly. And Germany lost all of its territory outside of Germany, like any sort of like what Puerto Rico was for the United States. They lost it all. So what's silly is you have a country that's extremely poor, trying to rebuild, and they owe reparations. Okay? The reason why a lot of countries take on these territories is for economic purposes. So you take away their territory, their ability to make money, but yet you require them to pay money. Doesn't seem like it makes much sense. It's like you are a boss to someone that they personally owe you money for, personal issues, and then you fire them. They're not going to be able to pay you back. They don't have any money. It just seems silly. And they also just made them feel very insecure too. Everyone else is continuing to grow, and we're shrinking. Okay, and we're being told we are to blame for the war, and we got to pay all this stuff. You're setting up a country with anger, resentment, all of those, feelings that might explode at some point. And then lastly, Germany was kept out of the League of Nations. The losers were not allowed to plead their case and forced just to listen to the treaty. And by plead their case, okay, so the League of Nations created the treaty. The treaty created the League of Nations. Treaty created the League of Nations. Germany was not allowed in. Germany was also not allowed at the treaty table, by the way, so they just had to take this. But the League of Nations, should Germany have been allowed, okay, so over here, should they have been allowed, they would have had a voice to continue to say, look what you're doing to Germany. You need to help us and not punish us. Look what's happening. We have dictators taking over. We have people starving. We have incredible inflation. Help us help the world safe for democracy. It seems weird. And you want to make the world safe for democracy, but you don't involve the world. Seems weird. The war to end all wars, make the world safe for democracy, but you're not included. And you're the ones to blame for it. So we're saying you're the ones to blame for it. But the governing body that's going to make sure wars don't happen again, you're not a part of. We're going to strip all this from you. Good luck surviving. It's not like Germany is going to cease to exist in the world. So that is why the Treaty of Versailles was a weak document. All right, so why was it justified for the United States, and that should say not to join the League of Nations? Let me fix that while we're here. Okay, so the League of Nations, President Wilson, that was his baby. He loved the League of Nations. But we did not, as the United States, join the League of Nations. That actually killed Wilson. He went on a personal campaign to try to convince the United States, the people of the United States, that we needed to join the League of Nations to ensure the world is safe for democracy. And in his, campaigning of that, he had an aneurysm and ended up dying. So it could have been coincidence, or it could have been the cause of it, whatever. But our government had this idea that our new foreign affairs, or foreign policy, had to be isolationism. And we couldn't be isolationists if we joined the League of Nations. They were very fearful that getting involved in the League of Nations would pull us into a war. And we could not allow that to happen. So we, the issues that Americans had with the League of Nations is, first, the League's council is one representative from all countries, no matter the size. That's one issue we had, with the Great Compromise in the Constitution is, having equal representation. Is that fair when, one state is bigger than the other? Well, this is, one country. And that rep votes on behalf of an entire country. And we just didn't think that was fair, okay? So that's the analysis. Is that's not fair for the United States to be held to one man's voice. Of course, that voice should be leaning back on what the feelings of the United States are, but And shouldn't the United States have a bigger voice over smaller countries? That type of argument, just like you saw during the Great Compromise for the Constitution. So people had serious issues with that, especially when you have someone voting about potential war or embargoes or things like that. It just didn't seem to be the best idea. Second, it puts the United States in an alliance, something that we saw worldwide become an issue. Largely, the secret alliance was a big part of it, but George Washington had warned against this, and that's exactly what happened. Did the United States forming an alliance get us involved in World War I? No, but other alliances did, and we didn't want any part of that, especially when our new foreign policy is isolationism. So alliances caused World War I, so why would we want to get involved in that? There's analysis for that. So that one's pretty easy, short, two different things. And also just overall knowledge outside of that necessarily the, well, I guess it could be like intro type of thing. But President Wilson kind of hurt himself when he went, when World War I came to an end, he himself went over and was a part of the treaty making. That was very odd of the president to do that. Usually the president might go, but they're going to bring representatives from Congress and from both parties to be involved. So he offended Congress by not bringing anyone of Congress. So when he came back with his proposal and everything, they instantly were bitter and kind of were like, well, we're not going to work with you. On top of the fact that we did have a new policy of isolationism. So people just weren't really, Congress didn't want to work with Wilson. And he got to the point where he was unwilling to compromise, and that became an issue as well. So, all right, well, that is it. Wish you the best.